Durante el siguiente bloque estaremos presentando nuestra conferencia magistral La influencia de la tecnología en la educación, ¿cuál es el futuro de la enseñanza y del aprendizaje?, impartida por Gordon Freeman. Gordon es un apasionado de la educación, experto en política y tecnología educativa. Actualmente es presidente del Laboratorio Nacional para la Transformación de la Educación, cuya sede se encuentra en California. Esta es una organización sin fines de lucro que busca transformar la educación del siglo XX dentro del aprendizaje del siglo XXI. Freeman fundó esta organización de forma que pudiera ver hacia el futuro, actuando como una amplia plataforma social, organizacional y de investigación para alinear la educación con la economía del conocimiento y la cultura de la juventud. Gordon Freeman ha ayudado a la evolución del campo del e-learning y se ha abocado al cambio desde la educación básica hasta la educación superior. Con experiencia en diferentes empresas y organizaciones sin fines de lucro, ha sido productor ejecutivo de diferentes tipos de programas, ganando nominaciones al Emmy y el Grand Juicy Prize en el Sundance Film Festival. Gordon Freeman ha colaborado como vicepresidente de estrategia global de Blackboard en Washington, D.C., ha participado intensamente con diversos organismos y ha sido parte del Consejo de Organizaciones sin fines de lucro comprometidas con el cambio educativo. Freeman vive en California y es cofundador de la Escuela Internacional de Monterrey, una escuela de educación media básica que ofrece un excepcional programa académico de carácter internacional y extracurricular. Sin mayor preámbulo, le cedo el micrófono para dar inicio a esta conferencia y le pido a nuestro amable auditorio lo reciba con un caluroso aplauso.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. I come from Monterey, California, which was the capital of New Spain for quite some time. And I'm here today, very happy to be in Puebla. I want to thank BUAP. I want to thank our sponsors, Blackboard, SciComm, and Cognos Online. So today, I want to talk about several things. And to put them in context, what's really important is to understand, as you all know, that technology is moving fast. It's moving faster than anything else. Education does not move quickly. Technology moves fast, education doesn't. Yet the demands of the economy and the society require that we move faster and that we include more people. So the notion, thank you. So the notion is that in certain areas we have to break tradition with the past. Education is very traditional. And once we break tradition using technology, we can open up the world of education to many more people. So today I'll be talking about the disruption that social technology is bringing to the world and how education can work on that. Is the mic okay? Okay. All right. So I am president of an organization called the National Laboratory for Education Transformation. Our job is to look into the future, 3 to 5 years from now, and to be able to think, what happens if education doesn't look like it does today? What if it's a mix? What if it's a mix of other things? How is it going to change? We work in the United States with the University of Texas, the University of California system, and some agencies in the federal government, including our national laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico. I was with Blackboard as the Global Education Vice President. And in that job for Blackboard from 2005 through 2011, I had the opportunity to visit 18 countries. And I asked about education. I wanted to know what was happening in different parts of the world. How was technology being used? So I'd been in Singapore, in China, in Australia, in Africa, in the Middle East, all over. And what I found was education's very similar everywhere. The use of technology adoption is very slow, and the use of technology and the understanding of how it can facilitate education is really several steps behind where we are every day, logging on to get your email, to do your banking, to buy your airline ticket. These things are part of our daily world. They're not yet the same in education. So I left Blackboard at the end of 2011 to start the new foundation and to be able to look into the future. So today, I'm going to talk about the information age versus classical education, and even information age versus education technology. Talk about new forms that challenge the old structure, transformation perspectives we're looking at in the nonprofit foundation we call NLET, and then converting theory into practical application in the future direction of higher education. I'm going to stop several times and put some questions to you. I want this talk to go two ways. So to start with, after I left Blackboard, I wrote an article, and it was published by a publication in the United States called The Chronicle of Higher Education. And I said in that, education is like the fog, while the cloud is becoming where everybody's going. So fog versus education versus cloud, cloud versus fog. And when I published this, I got a tremendous amount of reactions from here in Mexico, other places in the world, and in the United States. And I began to say, well, how can I look at how we clear that fog up a little bit and we open up and see the sky? One of the things we know is that higher education has been challenged in the past. During the dot-com era, if any of you remember that, the whole notion of the university was going to go away. Online learning was going to take over. The textbook industry was going to go away. And we were going to end up with all digital goods. It hasn't happened. The university's here. This is a beautiful university. Books are still here. At the same time, we know very well that our students are looking at those three little items there, and they're on Facebook, they're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn. I was in Brazil recently, and second to the United States, Brazil is the most social nation in the world on the use of Facebook. So their per capita use of Facebook is higher than anywhere else in the world. It's presenting a huge problem because the amount of time that people are on Facebook is not necessarily the amount of time they're learning. And I live near Silicon Valley, where all these companies are, and I call them the great distractors. So they're making it difficult. So we have the old world and the new. In order to understand education, I went back in time, and I met a professor I'll talk about in a minute at the University of Oregon. He wrote a great book, and his book looks at 6 different stages in how knowledge has been managed over time. And it's important for us to look at this because we're going to be in the next chapter. We're talking here about chapter 7 in his book. So in the old days in Alexandria, in Egypt, you had the ancient library. And that's where all the learning that was known at the time was collected. Later, as the Dark Ages fell over Europe, the monasteries, the Catholic monasteries, maintained the documents, the Arabic documents, the Greek documents, all of those things that had started the exploration of knowledge. The university came about around 1100. And I want to tell you something. In case you ever think things change, they don't. I went back into some of the original documents, and here's what I found. First of all, the students wrote home all the time for money. Okay? And they, in very nice language, they would write home and ask their father in very formal words about the fact they needed money. What do you think the second thing is that students were doing? Anybody? Cerveza. Okay? So, at the University of Paris, in like 1100 or 1200, they formed nations. And you could be from Poland, but you might be in the French nation. They had drinking contests. They ran around in the streets. And the early university, the professors you would sign up with a professor. That professor would present a syllabus. You would learn from that professor. They would test you. Okay? 1100, 1200 AD. We're all the way forward now, and that is beginning to happen again. Okay? The university structure grew up around these professors, and then you go into the next stage, which the printing press gets established in the mid-1400s. By 1500, you're in what's known as the era of the letters. And what that means is that people wrote papers, they began to write books, and those contained the knowledge. And that's where the discussion was. From there, the university takes the next step. And by that time, universities are forming here in the New World. Then you have administrations that are managing the unmanageable faculty who are managing the cerveza drinking students. Okay? Finally, by the early 1900s, the scientific methods entered the university, and this fellow said the laboratory began. So we began to experiment and use the scientific method. So what I look at after studying that history, which was really fascinating, to look at how knowledge moves, you then look down below. Who could have ever imagined at any stage that Google or Facebook or Wikipedia or these things would be global, everywhere in the world that somebody has just a little thing in their hand, they have access to this knowledge. But these two worlds are still pretty separate. I mean, you can be on campus and still go look up something on Google, but you're not on a campus that's using the technology the way you use it in everyday life. And it presents a problem. So let me ask, if anybody's comfortable asking a question, do you see this split between what's happening in the consumer world and what's happening at your institution? Hands? All right, I see one. Okay, so anybody have a question? All right, no? So let me go on. Now, how many of you have heard of any of these companies? The ones in the middle. These are the MOOCs. Okay, these are called massive open online courses. So now, for the first time last year, there's some middle ground between those universities in the old world and the new world. These companies have gotten in the news lately. They include Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So they're the biggest brands essentially right now in the United States. And they're changing certain things. So they've gotten a tremendous amount of news. They were written out about during the Davos conference. They're seen in our Wall Street Journal and in other publications. So in the States, there's a tremendous amount of talk about this. How many of you, is anybody taking a MOOC right now? Anybody taking any of these courses? Okay. So everywhere I go in the world, people are already doing this. This has been less than a year. I have a couple friends, one who's a professor of mathematics at Stanford, and he did a math course for non-math students about math over the years. 60,000 enrollments. And that boiled down after a while to about 15,000 active students who took his course. He created a digital book and put it on Amazon at the same time and sold about 5,000 copies of that. Now, this professor couldn't believe the discussion. The difference between the MOOC and a regular online course is that an online course in some ways is an extension of a regular course. A MOOC is very much a learning community that decides to get involved in this subject matter. So in other words, the students being driven to the subject because they're interested or they think it might be useful. I visited with a rector yesterday, The rector told me he's taking a MOOC on getting back into computing, so he's got a better dialogue with his students. So it seems to be happening quite a bit. I have another friend at Stanford who did a MOOC on building modern learning environments. His name is Paul Kim. You can look up his MOOC. What he did, which was fascinating, was he had this, the representation around the world was pretty thorough. No country was more represented than another. And I was in his office a couple weeks ago, he went to the map and said, pick a place out. So we picked out a little town in Pakistan. There were 5 people in his new learning design course. His course has been over for a semester, yet there's still about 800 people that are still communicating inside that course. Now, I don't think that MOOCs are going to replace education at all in the traditional sense, but they're widening it out. They're opening up participation. They're allowing people who just have an interest to come in. And so we're finding in different